So now I'm down to only about 5 days to the show. It's Sunday. I gotta have the car at the show on Friday afternoon or evening. I believe I have enough time to get through this transmission today and rebuild it with new bearings and seals, and then putting a new synchro in 3 and 4, because that's something I typically need to do every year. Actually, I've had to do it twice a year, typically, but last year I made it all the way through the season, so I must be getting better at shifting. Anyway, I'm gonna knock this Tremec 3650 apart. Gonna just split the case halves, get all the parts out, and then we'll start replacing bearings and seals and all that stuff. For the random pieces of pipe stuff I had here, this was literally the only way that I could set this up to press it, because my gears didn't fit through between the two C-channel pieces, and they just happened to have enough stuff here to make height. I think I barely got to it by a 1/4 inch maybe, but was able to press it down. So this bearing and spacer comes off, and then the first gear set, we got the internal bearing and sleeve, it looks like. And to try to keep the stuff all in order, I'm just restacking it on the bench the way it is. There's a tiny little ball bearing here. This little thing acts as a pin. We'll just pull this whole next 2 shift assemblies and gear assembly off. Alright, it looks like we got a snap ring for the rest of it to come off. Oh, then this sleeve here must press off this way. Alright, now I got it stripped down the rest of the way. Yeah, you can see there's a little bit of heat scoring or stickiness there that was holding that ring on. That's why I couldn't get that front gear assembly off right away, but it just took some light pressure and pressed the whole thing off. So now I've got everything stacked in the reverse order of how it comes off. So it's just going to be a matter of piece by piece. This is going to go back, and then I'll be swapping out the bearings as I go, and any of the synchro parts that need changing. I will be just scrubbing all this down in the parts cleaner as I go, and I'm kind of just going to do it one piece at a time so that I don't mix anything up and get it messed up. I've had this thing apart enough times, I'm not too worried about messing it up, you know, just because I'm keeping everything in line. But if you're able to read a diagram well, the best thing you can really do is get an exploded view of the transmission, and I know that I can find those online, so I'm not too worried about whether or not I get some pieces messed up, because at some point you'll be setting things together and it's either going to make sense or it's not, and I can always go look up that diagram and then just kind of look at how it's all assembled. You know, exploded view like not broken transmission, exploded view like how the assembly goes together. I did get a complete new bearing kit and seal kit. I have 2 synchros that'll be 3rd and 4th gear most likely, although I think 3rd gear look pretty good yet, but we'll just be checking them as I go. I have those in case I need them. I have a shim kit, which is for the end cases when it goes together. I do believe my transmission's ended up where it's got a little bit of a loose slop in there. I do have some shims that I kind of made before to make up for that, so these should be a better fit. Got new rear seal and some front seals, different bearings, so mostly I'm just trying to refresh this. And luckily I have 2 spare brass shift forks. Actually I got 3 in there, so I can pick the best ones. This is not how they're supposed to look. I mean, they were seeing quite a bit of side wear, but they're supposed to have a solid face on here that clearly broke off, so I'll be replacing them, and that should continue to get through this. This transmission maintenance has probably been the biggest issue I've had each year. But it holds up and it works well. I mean, even with it being this broken, I had no idea that I noticed any problems whatsoever with the way it was shifting. But I'm sure the fork was sloppy in there. Another good thing to mention here would be the fact that I went with this billet shift fork for 3 and 4. And I know one thing was with the way the transmission was getting hot, doing several laps, I ended up having to thread it and tap through the whole thing and then put a bolt in it that actually had some taper, so it kind of jammed on the back side. Otherwise, this pin had fallen out at 2 different events on me. And it was just because I'm sure this aluminum was expanding more and it lost the press fit on that pin. And even trying to re-expand the pin, it wasn't helping, so... Something to be of note if you're going to be doing circuit type stuff and not just street and drag racing is you probably want to do a more positive locking style on the billet shift fork assemblies if you switch them out. Alright, ready to start assembling this again. Like I said, I'm going to go piece by piece. So I got this gear scrubbed up, got a new bearing stuck in there. We're just going to set it down on here, get it pushed in. Then we have this spacer lock ring. That seems to be the direction. Now we have this tiny little ball bearing piece that needs to go in this hole right up here. So I'm going to set that in there, tilt the shaft so that it holds it in place, and then set this ring on, and then you see it's just got a little bit of wiggle room there, but it locks on that piece. Now this was the part that I thought should slip off, but actually it's a little bit of a press fit to hold this gear assembly all together. Because of the way it's got an interlocking setup on the bottom of this gear, it needs to be in place before we start assembling everything else, or it might be difficult to get all that lined up later. Next we have the blocker ring assembly, and the, well, this ain't the synchro, but it's the, I don't know, not sure what that's called. Anyway, we're going to start with the ring. It goes down, it engages in these holes there. Actually, I think that's wrong. I got to put this other piece on first because it came off last, because it's a taper fit like that. So yeah, this guy goes on first, whatever the hell that is. Then we got the friction ring section, which goes on. So alright, now all that's engaged there, and then this one will go on. It'll be set so that this taper engages the outside there, and it all snaps together and lines up. So this is where it's a matter of trying to get everything lined up for gear engagement. I do believe this would be first gear. Now I have the shift mechanism assembly. The shift fork actually rides in this groove, and then that's what pushes it in or out to select each gear by engaging these. You got to be careful with these things because of these tiny little springs in here and the little blocks that hold tension up there. I believe that's part of what kind of like locks it in gear. Now when we go to put these on, we're going to want to make sure that the little tabs that are in here, these extra little blocks, line up with the receiver groove for those blocks on this engagement ring. But we can spin it as we go, so really we just need to get it started. There you can see that little block extension. It's got to go into the open area on the next sleeve. Now that lock ring groove is fully exposed, so now I know that it's on correctly for sure. So before I stick the rest of it in here and make it a pain in the butt, I can put this snap ring in there. Alright, fresh bearing. And we're going to line up our grooves. We have to squeeze that bearing because it's a split style thing, and then we'll just turn that till it drops in. Alright, and our next piece. Synchro, that actually looks okay. Now the ring came off of here, but this one's been kind of locked in place. Honestly, I really have no reason to take it apart because it's just pushed on there. So we'll just get this set back in place. I gotta line up these different sections so that they're centered on the blocks. Gotta check the blocks for wear. I mean, they get worn. I've replaced a couple of them before because they were like really grooved out and messed up. We're just gonna get it. We can push that on there. This ring needs to get pressed on first, then it'll be the bearing, and then that goes over the top. So this again is just gonna lock all of this together. Alright, I had to back up here for a second because after I pressed that sleeve on there, this little gap here for this ring to move around, if I can get a screwdriver on it there, you know, it should have that room in it. And after I pressed that ring on, like, that was tight, and the one down on the bottom had space, but I couldn't get it to actually engage in gear like that. So I took it back apart just to check and see what was up there. I went all the way down, double checked again whether I had that piece the right side up or not. When I went and flipped it over, it clearly didn't work that way, lining up. Even though I did get it down to where the snap groove went in, but it made this side here this gap here extra loose, so I know it didn't need to go that way, so I flipped it back over where it was. Now we're putting it back together, so I'm going to try to pay attention to what's going on here, that when I put that sleeve on, I thought it should bottom out, but maybe it doesn't, and I compressed it too much, but we'll check it again here. Alright, I think I know what it did. So, this doesn't line up exactly flush down there, and I think what I did was I pressed this in far enough that it actually pushed everything else down flush and kind of pinched it. So when I press this sleeve on again, I'll just be careful not to, I'll just bring it down to that area and not actually compress it. Because right now everything shifts nice the way it should and moves, so we just got to be careful where this ends up. And just eyeballing it set up like this, factoring in for the inside chamfer for where it would leave the witness marks, that seems to line up perfectly. So just need to press it down to there and not actually push through it until it stops hard. Alright, got it now. So it's got just a little bit of movement in there, because down this one's all snap ringed and it's got just a little bit of movement too. So just mimicking that, and we'll keep on assembling. Have another teeny tiny ball bearing to go in place. And now we'll need the new bearing to press on. Press this bearing on. Actually, I just had a piece of roll cage tubing that I used to slide over the top. It just went down till it bottomed out, and there's still just a little bit of play in this gear. And I just wanted to verify that by sticking on this 5th gear and making sure that the snap ring groove lines up, which you can see it does. So that's in place. I have to leave 5th gear off of here for now because it's got to pass through the case half before 5th gear goes on that snap ring. But I'm confident that's the correct height. All the gears shift. Before I clean these up, one way to verify that they need to be replaced, well, this one's totally missing a piece of friction. But what I've been doing in the past is if I can push it up and it pretty much has no gap in here and I can still turn it, that synchro is nearly completely worn out. A new one is actually going to be away from the edge a little bit. Oh, look at that. This thing's actually completely just falling apart. So, yeah, the synchro shot. I'll show you what it looks like with the new one. So here's with a new synchro. If I can push it up, you can see I can't rotate it, and it still has a larger gap in between. That's how you know it's a fresh synchro still. And as I mean, the old one you could see was falling apart, so this is definitely something that needed to be done. That was 3rd gear, by the way. I'm really not surprised whatsoever. I also swapped out these buttons. They were very worn. These ones that I swapped in are also worn, but not near even half as bad as what the ones I took out were. I think it's just from the wear surfaces every time this sharp edge goes back and forth. I don't know, maybe that could be deburred or cleaned up. I don't know, I'm not that serious or knowledgeable into how to make this a better, more performance transmission, but I'm just going to put in the best parts that I have on hand. The big thing is making sure the synchro was changed out, because again, I didn't notice anything weird going on with the shift, so I'm just going to put in the less worn parts that I have. We'll need a new bearing to put on here. I have the new bearing. Synchro. Let's see, it's got to be the step side. Oh yeah, got to make sure to line up the tabs with the synchro. There we go. And then we got that snap ring to go in. Now I have a problem where I can't get this race out without removing this anti-tamper screw. Because it holds this other gear in here. But, I mean, bearing seems to be fine there, and that race certainly isn't terrible.
Probably one of the only opportunities this entire weekend. We'd like to, number one, thank you, but also show.
Alright, I've swapped out the seal. These are the new races, and I've shimmed them the same as the old stuff that came out. Well, actually, this one was shimmed at 45, so I've shimmed both at 45. This one was only 35. That was shims that I made do with from a rear end kit, actually. So now that I have the proper type of shim, I'm just putting both at 45, and then we'll start setting everything together, and I guess I'll just have to kind of bolt it up, see if there's any play, how much resistance there is. I know before, I feel like for how hot it was getting, it almost had to be loose, so if I can shim it so that each shaft has a little bit of resistance to it, then that might be the better way to go. Alright, I found some specs. I need 1 to 5 for the end play on both shafts. I'm going to do one shaft at a time. I just have it pressed together, just the front case and the main case. And by using my dial indicator and magnetic base on the shaft, I'll be able to just lift up and down and see how much play there is with no shims. So we're looking at like 20 there, and when it drops down, we're at 39 and a half, so I'm going to need to put about 15 to 20 thousandths worth of shim in there. Alright, put a shim in there, and now I have just about 1.5 thou of movement, so that'll be good for the counter shaft. Alright, it's been a little more messy to try to set the main shaft. This spacer ring here also locks in that lock ring that went on the front. It actually encapsulates that. Then our front assembly for the input shaft with the new inner bearing, thrust bearing, and synchro, and a new bearing pressed on. Now we'll slide that on here and line it up. Then we need to put the front case on. Gotta be careful about lining this up. You gotta make sure that the back bearing drops in place as well to get this all to line up right. now with it pretty close, put 2 bolts in here. Just cinch it up since nothing sits flat. So I was showing about 30 thousandths previously, so now I can move it around. 48, and I'm still showing 8, so I'm gonna have to pull it back apart, stick another shim in there, and check it again. Alright, now that I have my shimming set, I was able to get both the main shaft and the counter shaft to 1/1000ths of clearance, so it's nice and snug. As soon as everything heats up, hopefully that maintains and it doesn't end up too loose. It is a little bit less shim than I had last time by about 4 thousandths, which means last time I had about a 3 thou preload set up on them, so we're going to be a little bit looser. Maybe that'll free up a little bit of power, but obviously it wasn't hurting anything because all the bearings look good coming apart, so there's a bit more window than what the factory says. I need to get the shaft started in here. However, I mean, I gotta start with that, and then I gotta put all the shift forks on here and wiggle all that stuff in, and it's really just kind of a finesse thing. We'll get rid of the input shaft up here and its loose parts that just kind of flop around. Get that set back here. I'll slide the main shaft out, and then I want to have this kind of set on the bench in a way that I can start adding the shift forks to it. But like I said, we're going to want to get this counter shaft in there first because of the way everything angles together. I've just found that that's the easiest way to do it. So I'll get this going. That bearing has to go in behind that reverse gear first. And I don't want to push it in all the way. I want to leave it out because putting the main shaft in with the shift forks is kind of a pain in the butt too. I'm just going to set the case back off to the side. Now I'm ready to slip the main shaft in. We have to have the shift forks all installed beforehand for that. I know my billet one is 3/4, so that's going to be to the front. Pushing down, that means 1, 2 needs to be the lower one. And then 5th in reverse or the higher one up. Nope. Helps put the darn thing in the right direction. And this is where it gets all kinds of finicky and kind of kick the butt. No, I must have got that wrong because this is in the way. There, now they're all lined up. This is where everything becomes a real hassle. Sometimes it helps to have it vertical for trying to line everything up, but then it also gets the secondary shaft kind of doing its own thing. But we'll give it a try. Alright. As you can see, it's not exactly the most fun thing, and it's kind of a constant juggle about where the shift rods are compared to where the secondary shaft is as it goes in. But we've made it. So now I can put the input shaft assembly on. I want to double check that none of these things fell out and they're all where they're supposed to be. And then it's a matter of wiggling this in there. This needle bearing likes to pop off, so I got to kind of be careful with that. A whole bunch of it likes to fall apart because it's, again, it's kind of a balancing act. Alright, there. Now that we've got that on there, we can put the front case on, cover on. And none of these have gaskets, so it's going to be just a little bit of gasket maker all the way around on this in order to seal it up. Just like doing anything with an engine, you don't need to smear a whole bunch of stuff on here. It's just going to be a very, very light layer if you can help it. Now all we got to worry about is getting these shift pins or shafts lined up and started. And make sure we're not held up by a counter shaft. Might have it being held up by one of the plungers here. So we're going to need to rotate this. And just like that. Alright, now I need to put all these bolts in. They only get torqued to like 18 to 28 foot-pounds or something like that. I've regularly been doing 28 with them, just because for the size fastener they are, that's, you know, an acceptable range. Not putting any Loctite or anything on them. As I said before, the trans will get super hot, so any Loctite's going to just melt anyway. We'll just snug these up while we still got our silicone being wet. You notice I'm not trying to impact this at all, because really 28 foot-pounds is not that much. And just jump around on the sequence. It's always such a pain in the butt. Well, I don't know what all that was about. I mean, most of them torqued up right away. Several of them were like, cringy. The fact that they weren't torquing up, but I don't know, I pulled the two out that weren't going, and I couldn't see where they were shrinking down on the diameter at all, like they were stretching. And I don't think they were pulling through the aluminum, because they're probably got almost 3/4 of an inch of engagement in the threads, so that should be plenty. I don't know if it's just the bolt or if it's just the way that the case moves around when it gets torqued up. This has happened pretty much every time I've done it, and I haven't had a bolt actually break or anything strip out, so it's just trying to be careful about it to make sure that I don't end up with having something like that happen. Now for the shift indents, we've got 3 pins. There's 2 that are like the one on the left here, and then there's the smaller one. The smaller one needs to go inside of this shift shaft, and then I'll take the other one and I can drop it down the slot, and that's what gives you the indents between each gear. And then there's a cover that goes over and bolts on. Alright, I've put 5th gear on and the lock ring. The reason I put it on after versus before is because this is an 8.2 5th gear and it doesn't fit through the hole in the casting. Otherwise the original like 6.2 or 6.4 gear would have fit, whatever it is. So now we got a spacer ring. Again, might go that way, I'll have to look at it, but needs a little ball down there to hold it in place. And then it'll be a bearing and the reverse gear, and then the reverse gear shift assembly. We'll have to put the fork and the ring on all at once and line it up with the shift shafts over here. Now I need to put the springs and caps back on here. These are also part of the indent system for holding a gear. And they just have these pretty heavy springs. The plungers are all in there, so they just get pushed back in. And the caps put on and tightened down. Now this rear seal needs to get pressed in. I'm just going to go find a socket or something that's about that size and then just tap it in.
226, I believe, 225. And that's fine. That's absolutely your one opportunity.
That was my every session. We're
going to go to the limit until you break the limit, right? You just don't do it in an unsafe way. That's the thing. You don't send it to the moon. But what I really love about Riley's car, it's so period correct. Now the fender flares obviously aren't. He did that. He made his car, but he's on some old school Goodyear slicks. Drivers in some options. You can't take any more track. They've been removed from the sort of company to destroy your car.
I was 100 horsepower down.
Well, I guess now I've run into a problem. That's why they're not torquing up. Shit! Probably need to replace all these. But well, with this horrible news, I'm just gonna finish putting the shifter together because I won't have to mess with any of that. I'm gonna have to get this bolt back out of here. I think there's enough sticking out. Maybe I can get it out without having to try to drill it and mess up threads. But at this point, I think I'm just going to measure up one of the bolts for the back. Might as well yank one out the front and then just order a full new set of bolts for putting this together, because these should not have had a problem taking a lousy 25 foot-pounds. So clearly a few of them are failing or have failed and need to be replaced. But anyway, we'll finish putting the shifter together. It's just a few more parts anyway, and then it won't be in the way. I can always just swap them out one at a time later on. So there's this spring, which has a couple of bolts to hold it in, and then on top one, this goes on either side of the cup that holds the shifter, and then has a washer and this screw to hold it down. With the shifter, it just has this plastic cup, just sits down in there, so it'll kind of just sit in like that. You'll need to do the same thing with case halves, just smear a little very thin layer of silicone around this. Alright, well, that's rebuilding the Tremec 3650, other than my setbacks of the bolts and stuff. Honestly, I mean, if you're at least all concerned about the durability of this transmission, I mean, really the bolts and then the way the shift fork pads were worn out, I wouldn't count that as anything, because I've been racing this transmission and street driving it for 4 years now. And I bought this thing used to start with, and I mean, you can see all the gears were in great shape. The only thing I'd change gear wise was I put that 8.2 fifth gear in, or maybe an 8.1. And then I've swapped to the upgraded input shaft, and this is the first time I've actually put bearings in it. Otherwise, it's just been some synchros here and there, and this has been a very reliable transmission for what it is. And as you saw, it's fairly simple. I mean, I've been able to tear this thing apart and fix it at the track before, especially when that pin fell out of the billet shift fork, so that was a bit of a learning curve. But I was able to fix that at the track, and I didn't even miss a session. So it's just a matter of, you know, what you can do. I mean, I've modified this one to build to the back of my Oldsmobile. You can buy an adapter plate for the front to actually bolt on a proper bell housing to go to any GM application, and it's just a really durable transmission. I mean, the big thing is just upgrading the input shaft and the bronze shift fork pads versus the plastic ones, and it's a really durable transmission. There's kits available for building these things where they can be upgraded to like 900 horsepower, and it works good. I'm real happy with it. It shifts nice, it drives nice, it races nice. And for the money that you would spend on what would now be a TKX, that by the time I buy the bell housing and all the stuff to put it into this car, it would be well over $7,000, versus even now, with all the upgrades I've put into this, and now that rebuild kit was, I think, $450 with the stuff I got, I'm still into this transmission and the whole 5-speed swap for less than half of what it would be if I bought a brand new TKO or TKX. So, and it works. It's worked well.